My son was thrown out of his home at 6:17 in the morning. When I got there, he was sitting on the cold concrete steps, holding his 4-year-old daughter asleep in his arms. Beside him were 2 suitcases. Just 2 suitcases. That was everything left of 8 years of marriage. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He didn't pound on the door that had just locked behind him. He only stared at the ground, the look of a man who just had the last of his soul pulled out of him. But what tightened in my chest wasn't that sight. It was the truth that I had known this day was coming. For 16 months. I'd seen every sign my son shut his eyes and refused to look at. Seen the man quietly pulling every string behind it all. I had planned for this morning. Worked out every detail. But no plan on earth could prepare a father for the sight of his own son being forced out onto the curb, still holding his little girl in his arms. He didn't know I was standing there. Didn't know I'd been waiting for this morning for over a year. And he had no idea that the man who'd just thrown him out had made the biggest mistake of his life. Because behind that door was more than a broken marriage. There was a secret, worth millions of dollars. A secret I'd kept hidden in an envelope for months. One that, if my son ever read it, would shatter him. Let me back up. My name is Walter Brennan. I'm 63, retired structural engineer, and I raised my son Caleb alone after I lost my wife Eleanor to ovarian cancer when the boy was 12. I'm telling you that so you understand the shape of us. We are quiet people. We fix things. Caleb grew up to be the kind of man who still writes thank you notes by hand and means every word. He taught American history at a public high school in Asheville, and if you want to know everything about what a person values, look at what they're willing to be underpaid to do. He didn't marry for money. He married a woman named Delia Marsh because he loved her laugh and the way she remembered small things people told her. And I still believe she loved him back. She is not the villain here. Keep that in mind, because it matters later. Delia's father is a man named Roland Marsh. If you live anywhere near Buncombe County, you've seen the name on buildings. He owns 6 commercial properties downtown, 2 auto dealerships off the interstate, and the kind of quiet influence that gets phone calls returned in minutes. He walks into a room and waits. He never learned how to be uncomfortable, and I knew the first time I shook his hand that this was the most dangerous thing about him. A man who has never been told no will eventually decide the word doesn't apply to him. Caleb brought them both to my house for a holiday dinner 3 autumns ago. Delia was warm. She asked real questions and listened to the answers. But Roland walked through my home the way an inspector walks through a building he's already decided to condemn. He didn't say anything cruel. He didn't have to. He paused a half-second too long before he called my place charming, like he'd reached for the word from a high shelf. I handed him a glass of sweet tea, and I smiled, and I watched him the rest of the night. By the time he left, I had the whole man mapped, and I didn't like the blueprint. Here's where I have to be honest with you. If that were your child bringing someone home, you'd have felt it too, that small cold drop in your stomach when a stranger looks at your life and quietly prices it. I said nothing. A man's happiness deserves a clear run before you start pointing at cracks. So I filed it away. That's what I do. I file things away. They married 8 months later at Roland's estate, 200 guests, an open bar that never blinked. Roland gave a toast that was really a speech about himself, about the high standards he'd raised his daughter to expect, about the responsibility of joining a family like the Marshes. He said it warmly. Everyone laughed in the right spots. Caleb laughed too. I didn't. I drove home that night turning one word over in my hands. Responsibility. The slight weight he'd put on it. The way it sounded less like a blessing and more like a lease with a clause nobody had read out loud. I parked in my driveway and sat in the dark a while. Then I went inside and wrote the date down. The first entry in a journal I'd keep for over a year. My granddaughter came 14 months into that marriage. 6 pounds, a full head of dark hair, and a chin that was pure Caleb. He called me from the hospital at 2 in the morning, and his voice was a voice I'd never heard from him before, cracked all the way open, brand new. "Dad," he said, "she's here. She's perfect. I can't even, Dad, she's just perfect." I drove through the empty mountain dark, and I sat at that nursery glass and looked at her for a long time. We named her well. He named her Nora. And something settled into my son the day Nora arrived, the way ballast settles into the hull of a ship and finally lets it ride steady. He'd always been good. Now he was anchored. He read to her every single night, He signed up to coach a soccer team for kids who could barely walk. He was her father in every way that has ever counted. I need you to hold on to that sentence. Every way that has ever counted. The trouble didn't arrive all at once. It never does. It comes in small, unrelated pieces that only form a picture when you finally lay them side by side. About 8 months in, Caleb mentioned Roland had offered him a job. Not building anything. Roland wanted him to connect with community stakeholders, which is a polished way of saying he wanted a well-liked school teacher to be a friendly face for projects that needed one. He wants me to leave teaching, Caleb told me. But Dad, it's 3 times the money. I asked what Delia thought. He paused. She thinks I should take it. I asked what he thought. He said he was considering it. I told him to take his time, and I said nothing else. He took it 2 months later. I visited his new office on the 4th floor of Roland's flagship building. Big window, leather chairs, a lot of mahogany that felt borrowed instead of earned. Caleb wore a suit that didn't quite look like him yet. He was proud, and I was proud of him for being proud, and underneath that I was sick with worry about everything he'd set down to stand in that room. Because here's what I've learned in 63 years. When a powerful man hands you something for free, he isn't giving. He's installing a lever, and one day he's going to pull it. It was my neighbor Sam who pointed me down a road I hadn't thought to walk. Sam's worked family law for almost 30 years. He's not my lawyer, he's the man I've shared a fence and 1,000 Saturday mornings with since before Caleb could drive. One evening on my porch I was just thinking out loud, not accusing anyone of anything. Sam went quiet a while. Then he said, Roland gave him the job, but did he ever give him an actual contract? I didn't know. I called Caleb that night and asked like it was idle curiosity. There was no contract. He was month to month, classified as an independent contractor. More flexible for both of us, Roland had told him. Sam looked at me over his coffee the next morning and didn't say a word. He didn't need to. That was the morning I started keeping real notes. I want to pause and talk to you directly for a second. If you have ever sat across from someone you love and realized they've walked into a trap with a smile on their face, and that telling them would only make them defend the person setting it, then you know the specific loneliness I'm describing. You see the whole thing. You can't say it yet, so you carry it alone. I carried it for a long time. 5 months into that journal, Delia came to my house alone. That had never happened. I made her coffee, and she sat at my kitchen table and stayed silent a long while before she spoke. Walter, she said, I need you to know I love Caleb. I told her I knew. And I love Nora more than anything. I knew that too. She looked into her cup. My father has ideas about how things should be, about what Nora's life should look like. And sometimes his ideas and Caleb's aren't the same. I asked what kind of ideas. She looked up, and what I saw in her face was a woman standing at a fork in a road she never chose, and wasn't sure she was allowed to walk away from. He wants Nora raised a certain way. The right schools, the right people. He calls it the right foundation. He thinks Caleb is a good man, but not. She stopped. Not what? I asked. She didn't answer. She finished her coffee and left 20 minutes later, and she hugged me at the door longer than she ever had. I stood in my kitchen after the door clicked shut, and I didn't move for a long time. That night I called Sam, and then I did something I'd never imagined doing in my life. I hired a private investigator. His name was Dean Holloway. Sam vouched for him, and he was quiet and patient and thorough. I asked him to map the financial structure between Roland and my son. What Dean found went so far past what I'd feared that I had to read it twice. The house Caleb and Delia lived in, a brick colonial in a leafy neighborhood. I'd assumed they bought together, was owned entirely by a holding company that Roland controlled. Caleb's name was nowhere on the deed. It never had been. Roland had called it a wedding gift and simply never transferred a thing. The salary came through a third-party LLC. The whole arrangement meant Roland could end it any day with none of the protections a real job carries. And the prenuptial agreement, the one Caleb had signed with a lawyer Roland recommended, was written in language Caleb's attorney had called standard, but which Sam, reading it 3 years later, called extraordinarily one-sided. I read that prenup on a Tuesday at this same kitchen table. I read it twice. Then I sat back and I thought about the word charming. Now I have to tell you the part that changed everything. Not the money. Not the house. This is the part that kept me up at night and turned everything I did afterward into something cold and exact. In the course of his work, Dean spoke to a nurse who'd briefly worked at the clinic Delia used during her pregnancy. The nurse was long gone from that office, and had no loyalty to anyone. She told Dean that during a hard prenatal appointment, Delia had confided she wasn't certain Caleb was the father. I sat with that for 3 days. 3 days, doing nothing, just holding it. Then I built a careful little plan. I told Caleb I was finally putting together the family health history. Eleanor and I had always meant to make that her cancer made me realize how much it mattered. I said I wanted blood types, basic genetic markers, and that it'd mean a lot to include Nora's too. I found a home kit. I said we'd make a project of it. Caleb thought it was a beautiful idea. He had no idea I was also sending a separate cheek swab one Nora had given me. During one of the weekends she stayed here. The weekends she called Grandpa Camp to a private lab on its own. The results came on a Wednesday. I read the envelope once. Then I slid it into the drawer in my study, beneath the journal. Caleb was not Nora's biological father, and I want to be very clear about what I did next. Nothing. I made no call. I gave no sign. I sat with the heaviest piece of paper I've ever held, and instead of thinking about lawyers, I thought about a little girl who was almost 3, who called me Grandpa Walt, who put strawberry jam on everything, and who was scared of the drain in the bathtub. I thought about what she needed, and then I started building. Let me be honest about something, because I owe you that. If that envelope had landed in your hands, I don't know what you'd have done. I don't know if I'd judge you for any of it. The easy thing, the human thing, is to feel betrayed and let it pour out of you. But I kept thinking about Nora's face, and a betrayal you broadcast can't protect anybody. So I swallowed it. For her. I spent the next 8 months in slow, deliberate preparation. Sam helped me find Caleb a real attorney in Charlotte with no ties to the Marsh family or their usual firms. A sharp, quiet man named Marcus Webb. I paid the retainer myself. Out of savings I'd been quietly stacking since Eleanor died money, I always meant for Caleb anyway. We documented everything. The deed, the LLC, the prenup, and where it collided with North Carolina case law. Dean kept digging, and found 2 former Marsh employees who'd been pushed out the same way Caleb was about to be. I called them. I listened. One of them, a man named Errol who'd managed 3 of Roland's properties for nearly a decade, said something I wrote down and kept. He doesn't fire you, Errol told me. He arranges things until you've got no choice but to walk. Then he tells everyone you quit. And there's nothing on paper to say otherwise. I looked at that legal pad. I thought about my son in his borrowed office, in his borrowed house, with his borrowed title, and something in me went very still and very certain. I didn't tell Caleb any of it. Not because I didn't trust him, because I did know him. He'd confront Roland that same hour. He'd demand answers, hand over the advantage, and Roland's lawyers would have a polished response ready before dinner. I'd watched that man operate for years. He was never caught without a prepared position. I needed him caught without one. So I waited. And waiting, when you love someone and you can see the blade coming, is the hardest construction work there is. The morning came on a Thursday in October. I was in my living room when Caleb called, and his voice was flat in the way a voice goes when a man is holding himself together by sheer will. He locked us out, Dad. I asked him to slow down. My keycard didn't work at the office this morning. Roland called at noon and said my engagement with the company was being terminated. I drove home and the garage code wouldn't open. There was already a locksmith here. He stopped. Nora's inside. Delia texted me. She said I should take some time, that things have gotten complicated. Dad, she sounded like she was reading it off a card. I closed my eyes for 2 full seconds. Where are you right now? I asked. In the driveway. Is Nora with Delia? Is she safe? Yes. She's inside. She's fine. She doesn't even know anything's wrong. Okay, I said. You call your attorney. Right now. You tell him it's time. Then you come here. Silence on the line. Dad, what attorney? I don't have a... His name is Marcus Webb, I said. His number's in your phone under W. I put it there 6 months ago. Call him. Then come home. A long, long silence. And then very quietly, you knew. Come home, son. That's all I said. He sat at my kitchen table for a long time after he got here. I put coffee in front of him and let him be quiet for as long as he needed. Then I sat across from him and I started at the very beginning. I told him everything, the journal, Dean's findings, the deed, the LLC, the prenup, and what it actually said. I set the folders down one at a time and let him read each one. When I reached the lab results, I stopped. "There's one more thing," I said, "and I need you to hear it before you say anything." He looked at me. I slid the envelope across the table. "Now I want you to slow down with me here, because this is the moment everything in 16 months had been bending toward, and it deserves to be lived second by second." He picked up the envelope. His hands weren't steady, and he was trying to hide that they weren't. The kitchen was so quiet, I could hear the refrigerator hum, and the clock over the stove, and my own pulse in my ears. He opened it. He read it slowly, his eyes moving once across the line and then again, the way you reread something your mind refuses to let in the first time. The color left his face in a way I'd only seen once before, the night his mother passed. He set the paper down, very carefully, the way you set something down when you no longer trust your own hands. Outside, a car went by. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice and stopped. Inside that kitchen, neither of us breathed. "She's not mine," he said. "It wasn't a question, biologically," I said. He looked up at me, and I have never in my life wanted to take a man's pain into my own body the way I wanted to take his in that moment. And I said the only true thing there was to say. "That is the only way in which she is not yours. In every other way that has ever mattered, she is yours. She has always been yours. And that does not change because of what that piece of paper says. Not if I have anything to do with it." He pressed the heels of both hands into his eyes. His shoulders shook once. He didn't make a sound. I let him sit in it. I didn't reach for him, and I didn't fill the silence, because some grief has to be allowed to land before a man can stand up under it. The clock ticked. The coffee went cold between us. Time stretched out the way it does at a graveside, where 1 minute holds the weight of an hour. And then, slowly, he lowered his hands. His eyes were red and wet and absolutely clear. And I watched my son decide, in real time, who he was going to be in response to the largest and most irreversible thing that had ever happened to him. "What do we do?" he said. "We already started," I told him. "I'll be honest with you one more time. If that were me, sitting where my son sat, I don't know that I'd have found my feet that fast. I don't know that I'd have skipped past the betrayal and landed on the love. But that's the thing about how you raise a child. You don't get to choose the test. You only get to hope that the things you poured into them years ago are still load-bearing when the weight finally comes." His were. Marcus Webb filed the first documents the following Monday morning. The core of it was simple, even though the work behind it wasn't. The holding company's failure to ever transfer the house created enforceable rights under North Carolina law, a promise made and relied upon. The LLC pay structure, with no real contract, gave Caleb a strong claim for unpaid compensation. And the prenup, reviewed now by an independent attorney, had been signed under conditions that raised serious questions, because the lawyer Roland recommended had a 17-year relationship with the Marsh family that was never once disclosed to my son. Roland's attorneys responded inside 48 hours. They were good. They were fast. They'd clearly braced for some version of this. What they had not braced for was the scope of it. Dean had spent over a year being thorough. Errol came forward with his own records, kept in a fireproof box in his garage, and his termination mirrored Caleb's so closely it established a pattern. The second former employee, a woman named Paulette, had records of her own. And then there was what Delia did. I will not speak harshly of her. She was raised by a man who never once let her make a decision that didn't ultimately serve him. But when she finally understood the full extent of what had been done to her husband, to her marriage, to her daughter's family, she made a choice I think cost her more than anyone could see. She called Marcus Webb's office on her own. She handed over documentation that confirmed the deed and the contract structure. And she volunteered, alone and unprompted, the truth about Nora's conception that she had been carrying by herself for almost 4 years. I don't know what it took for her to lift that phone. I know exactly what it meant for us. Here's where I owe Roland Marsh a moment of honesty, even now. I don't think he woke up every day deciding to be cruel. I think, in the deepest part of himself, Roland believed he was protecting something. He'd built an empire from nothing, and to a man like that, money isn't comfort, it's responsibility, a structure you defend with your life. He looked at my son, a gentle school teacher with no business sense, and he genuinely saw a weak beam in a building he'd spent 40 years raising. He thought removing it quietly was kinder than open war. He thought he was being a good steward of his bloodline. That's the tragedy of men like Roland. They confuse control with love so completely that by the time they're old, they can no longer tell the difference and everyone around them pays the structural cost. Understanding that didn't make me forgive him, but it made what came next feel less like revenge and more like a building finally being inspected by someone it couldn't intimidate. The settlement took 4 months. I won't lay out every piece, because some of it is still sealed and some of it doesn't matter. What matters is the outcome. The house was transferred into Caleb's name. The very legal machinery Roland assumed would shield him was used, correctly, to enforce the promise that house had always been. The compensation claims were settled, his finances restored and then some, legal fees included. The prenup was thrown out entirely. Roland never saw the inside of a jail cell, and I want to be straight with you about that. What he did was structured carefully enough to stay on the civil side of the line, and I'm not naive about what money can buy in that regard. But 2 of his largest commercial partners, once they understood the pattern laid out in those proceedings, quietly walked away from him. A development deal he'd chased for 3 years collapsed in financing. The name stopped opening every door it used to open. I'll take that. I'll take that all day. This is the part of the story where I tell you what it taught me, because I think you came here for more than just the ending. This whole thing taught me that the most dangerous people in your life rarely raise their voice. They smile, they give gifts, they build the cage one comfortable bar at a time, and by the time you notice, you're already inside. The mistake most people make is believing that love and generosity always come without a hook. They don't always. And the thing Delia understood, in the end, that nobody else in that family ever did, was that protecting a child sometimes means betraying the person who raised you. So here's something you can actually do today, and I mean today. If someone has given you a home, a job, a future, put your name on the paperwork. Read the deed. Read the contract. Love and signatures are not the same thing, and the people who tell you not to worry about the difference are usually the ones counting on you not to look. And here's a question I want you to sit with after you close this. If everything you have right now were quietly held in someone else's name, how free are you really? Nora turned 4 in January. We had her party right here, because Caleb's living with me for now while he figures out what comes next. She wanted a princess theme, so I spent a Saturday afternoon letting a not-quite 4-year-old jam a paper crown onto my head while I sat on the back porch in the cold and told her I was the king of the frozen mountain. She thought this was the single funniest thing that had ever happened in the history of the world. Caleb stood in the doorway watching us, working through something not grief exactly anymore, more like the slow work of accepting a new shape for a thing you thought you understood. He's doing that work honestly. He picks her up and drops her off and reads to her at night when it's his time and coaches that soccer team every Saturday morning, and he has not faltered once. Not one single day. People sometimes ask me if I feel guilty for letting him walk through those months in the dark. I don't have a clean answer. What I know is that if I'd told him early, he'd have confronted Roland from raw feeling instead of from strength, and he'd have ended up isolated with no way out. What I built took time and silence, and the discipline to hold a plan steady while every instinct screamed at me to act. Was it right to let my own son not know? I don't know. I know it was necessary. Before I let you go, I want to hear from you, because I read every single comment, and your answers are why I keep telling these. Tell me honestly, do you think I was right to keep my son in the dark while I built all of this? Comment number 1 if you think I did the right thing protecting him in silence. Comment number 2 if you think a father owes his son the truth the moment he knows it, no matter the cost. Comment number 3 if you're somewhere in the middle and still turning it over. And while you're down there, tell me where in the world you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. I love seeing how far these stories travel in the dark. And if you've ever had someone with money or power look right through you and decide your life was theirs to rearrange, tell me about it. You are not as alone in that as you feel. If this story moved you, even a little, do me one small kindness and subscribe before you go. It's just me and a handful of people who care about stories like this, and every single subscriber genuinely keeps this channel alive. Stay a while. There are more stories coming, and I'd like you here for them. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Asheville to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.